Hello and welcome to the Hoop Collective podcast. We talk about the NBA. I feel like a new man. It's the afternoon. I don't know what day it is. Thursday. It's Thursday afternoon. God, it's great to have sleep. Joining us from Bristol, Connecticut, back at HQ, Tim Bontemps.
It's true. I am at HQ. There's a lot of cursing about MacMahon here. There's a lot of happiness that the season is over.
As soon as the season was over, they demanded he come in for meetings. We've seen enough.
I had a lot of hazard pay over the last couple of weeks. I had to see how I held up after.
There's a lot of debriefings, that are required immediately. It's first order of business.
Yes.
Joining us from Dallas, Texas, Ben MacMahon.
Howdy, partners. Bontemps, you know I'm a good friend of yours. So I will tell you, just before things get started, you might want to go like that, wipe that brown smudge off the tip of your nose there.
Well, who knows? Who knows what it is?
Is game 6 tonight, MacMahon?
I don't believe so.
The arena is available.
The arena is available.
All right. It's free agency season, free agency and draft. We'll be talking more about the draft as we get into next week. Want to start focusing on free agency and some teams doing some work here. I want to focus right now on the Paul George situation, which will probably be a big headline. I'm not going to assume anything about what players may all of a sudden become available that we aren't talking about now. But Paul George is certainly the most fascinating free agent. The Clippers are allowed to negotiate with him now and sign him or agree to an extension or a new contract. He could sign up for 5 years. Actually, can he sign for 5? Because I think he runs into age 38. Whatever it is, he could do a deal with the Clippers right now, but he hasn't, which isn't a surprise because he has been able to deal with the Clippers for months and hasn't gotten it done. And what I am interested in about Paul George is that it seems pretty obvious that he is going to get at least one big offer, probably more, but unless Joel Embiid was really just messing around, like he pretty much said, we're going to offer this guy a contract, which is what you'd expect. And if the Clippers know that Paul George is getting a max contract offer from anywhere, especially a place like Philly where he could walk in, and he was on his podcast this week, and he said something interesting, actually kind of two things interesting. He said, and I'm paraphrasing, chasing a championship isn't necessarily the number one thing. He wants to be on a contender, but chasing a championship isn't necessarily the most important thing. And then he specifically pointed out that fit would be important. Well, Philadelphia is a championship contender if they sign him, and the fit as their top wing player who can play with the ball and without alongside Maxey does make sense. So let me ask you this, Bontemps. If Philly is sitting there with the money to offer him a max, with a spot and it fits those criteria, why are the Clippers not matching that offer to make sure he doesn't get to free agency?
Well, I mean, there's a couple reasons you could think of, right? One is when they signed Kawhi Leonard to this contract back in January, whenever it was, and they signed him to a 3-year deal for $150 million, basically. We talked about at the time that set a precedent that, and MacMahon has been the one beating this drum especially, not only is it not max dollars, not max years. And so if you're Paul George, and by the way, it's sort of forgotten because he's had a Hall of Fame career, that you were in the building when this guy had a catastrophic leg injury and he's totally recovered from it and has been an incredible player again for years. Like one of the more remarkable things in recent memory that he came back from that has been fine. So if you're Paul George and you can get a 4-year deal for $200 and some million and an extra $60 million than what Kawhi got, probably, I mean, I would want the extra $60 million personally if it was me. But if you're the Clippers, like we've talked about, not only is there a precedent there with the Kawhi thing, there's also this second apron looming over everything, and the Clippers very clearly wanted to try to stay out of the second apron to reset their books.
Can I stop you real quick?
Yep.
I've had some fans of the pod admonish me because they're tired. I know that this won't be all of our listeners. They don't understand the word apron and the concept of the second apron. So at the start here, could one of us try in very basic terms to explain
Yes,
the aprons?
I'll explain it. I'll explain it right now. So there's the salary cap, right? Where you go up to a number, you go under the cap, like the Sixers are way under the cap, right? So you can spend up to the salary cap to sign players if you're under the cap. Then there's the first luxury tax line, which between the salary cap and the luxury tax, there's a gap. I will look up the exact number, but it's around $10 or $15 million this year, where it might be even more than that, where you can, so for this coming season, the salary cap is $141 million. The luxury tax line is $171 million. So you have $30 million to spend where you're over the cap, like the Indiana Pacers, for example. They signed Pascal Siakam. We'll talk about that later. They're going to be over the salary cap this year, but they'll be under the luxury tax. So you can operate in that space. Then
that's where most teams live. Most teams live above the
This
above
year,
the
I think
cap,
there were
under the
11.
tax.
Yeah, I think this year there were 11 tax-paying teams. I think 8, somewhere between like 8 and 10 or 11.
Fewer than that, but go on.
Might have been fewer than that. But so there's a $30 million gap there. So then over the luxury tax, there's a first apron, which is about $7 million over, and a second apron, which is $18 million over. Now, fans in the past have heard about teams being hard capped, where you can only go a certain amount over. That's always what the first apron has been. It's been like $6 or $7 million over the luxury tax line. Once you go over the first apron, you lose the ability to make some moves in the offseason. The second apron is one of the new things that the league put in the CBA. Once you go over the second apron, which again is about $18 million over the luxury tax, $189 million this year. Once you go over that second apron, you can't sign anybody for more than the minimum who's on another team. No exceptions at all. You can't put together multiple players. It's called aggregating players. You can't put multiple players together to make a trade. You can't make the trade the Bucks did for Jrue Holiday. You can't make the trade the Celtics did for Jrue Holiday or for Damian Lillard. Celtics trade for Jrue Holiday. The Suns trade for Bradley Beal. You can't make any of those trades anymore because you can't put players together. Got to be a 1-for-1 deal. And there's other rules too, other restrictions on it. But those are the various things that are put in place. The league is still adjusting to these new rules. And for fans at home, what they should think of is this second apron, which this year is $189 million. That's going to be a de facto hard cap for most of the NBA. And if you're going to go over that second apron, you're going to lose all these abilities to improve your team. You've got to be a team like the Celtics or Denver or one of these teams that thinks they can win the title. Because then it's worth it to potentially go into that second apron and lose all these things and have your draft pick frozen in the future and all this other stuff that we've talked about at different points. And if you're not that good, then it doesn't make sense to do that. And that, I think, is really ultimately where it comes down to with the Clippers is if the Clippers truly believe they were a championship level team, I think you'd see them pay Paul George and pay all these guys and go all in and do all this stuff. But they've got an aging roster without a lot of flexibility going forward. And Paul George and Kawhi Leonard have not proven to be good enough and healthy enough to get this team to the conference finals and beyond, which to me is the benchmark for being a championship level team. And so by their actions, again, actions over words, right? The actions of the Clippers would signify that maybe they'll pay Paul George when the rubber hits the road and they don't want to go into the toilet bowl with a bad team or a mediocre team. But
the toilet bowl being
they got
the
a lot
Intuit
of
Dome, which is full of toilets.
Yeah.
But if they don't get Paul George done, or he signs a max somewhere else, I think we all agree that the most likely outcome for Paul George, if he got a max from the Clippers, is he would stay. So if he does end up signing somewhere else, you think it's because he doesn't get a max. If he doesn't get a max, it's because the Clippers don't believe it's worth it to go into the second apron to keep him.
Okay, so 8 teams paid luxury tax, according to the great Bobby Marks, including obviously the Clippers, who pay the second highest bill. These are unofficial payments from Bobby, $142.4 million. Now,
so just to be clear, the salary cap for next year is $141 million.
Yes,
correct. The Clippers just paid $142 million, so they had like a whole other team
just in luxury tax. The Golden State paid $176.9. Of the 8 teams that paid luxury tax, 2 of them, only 2, made it out of the first round. And that is the Celtics, and then who are currently celebrating the championship, and the Denver Nuggets, who obviously were the defending champions. But look, I think for the Clippers and for Paul George, it really is as much about the years as the money. And, PG is clearly saying, hey, you didn't set a precedent with Kawhi Leonard. You did not set a precedent by him accepting a 3-year deal. You agreed to a contract with Kawhi, and the negotiations with Paul George are a totally separate entity. They were a package deal coming in. They are not a package deal right now. If they were, PG would have agreed to his extension the same time that Kawhi did agree to his. That didn't happen. He's going to have options. It sounds certain that Philadelphia will be an option. He has a player option. If he, he could play hardball and
yes.
And,
yes. Yeah. I'm going to go over that next.
Yes.
Okay. My point is his options aren't just cap space teams. We saw how Chris Paul left the Clippers when he used the power of his
we'll go over that in a
option.
second. Hold on one second. Is it possible that the Clippers are just trying to call a bluff? If Paul George is from Los Angeles, he's playing in Los Angeles. They are offering him a huge contract. It's just less than the max years. I don't know how much money they're offering, but let's just say it's probably about what Kawhi was offering.
Yeah, say it's identical to the Kawhi deal. I think that's
I mean,
guess.
Are they just trying to call his bluff?
I mean, I don't know if it's calling a bluff so much as I think that's sort of semantics, right? I think ultimately what it comes down to is if you have a guy like Paul George on your team and he leaves your team and you don't offer him all you could to keep him, it says that you don't think your team is worth going to the mattresses to keep it. Like that's keep it together. That to me is what it says.
Well, and they're clearly worried about not just the second apron, but committing to essentially being in the second apron for the long haul. And when,
again, for a
when
team,
they're in their later 30s and you're paying these guys 50 some odd, almost $60 million a year.
And for a team that in the 5 years those guys have been there together has made the conference finals one time. And Kawhi Leonard didn't play in it.
And obviously that is in large part because of their health issues. Now, do you expect their health issues to magically disappear as they approach their mid-30s? That would be
let me
a
hit you with
strange
this.
assumption.
We haven't said the name James Harden yet.
Yeah.
James Harden is a free agent. Now, before I get into that, let me just go over the player option thing. Paul George has a player option in his contract. This is relevant for what Chris Paul did, as MacMahon just said. He could pick up that player option, which is just under $49 million, and
48.8.
Then be traded. So, in other words, obviously the Sixers and the Magic have come up because they have max cap space. But if he would want to go to another team, for example, like the New York Knicks,
maybe even the old team that he helped build into this contender now.
The Thunder.
Oklahoma City. Yeah.
The Thunder have $33 million in cap space. I think it's in the low 30s. And so that would make it easier to make any transaction. But he could say to the Clippers, all right, I'm walking out the door and signing with Philly. This is what happened with Chris Paul. And please correct me if I get any detail wrong, MacMahon. Chris Paul had a player option in his contract.
Yep.
He wanted to go be with the Houston Rockets. The Rockets were ready to create cap space to sign him. He said to the Clippers, trade me. I'm going to opt into my contract. Trade me to the Rockets, or otherwise I'm walking out and signing.
Yeah, you're leaving me one way, or I'm leaving one way or the other.
Right.
Do you want to get value in return? If so, I'll opt in and you trade me.
Yes, and so that's what they did, and they got a couple of decent players. It was not
Pat Bev, Lou Williams, Montrezl Harrell. I mean, honestly, it was a decent return given the circumstances.
That team ended up making the playoffs with those guys. Okay, so that option is out there. So Paul George could do that. And as a side piece on the Knicks, the reason that the Knicks makes sense is that the Knicks could make a deal with any team because they have some expiring contract money plus the draft picks.
Yep.
And if you're the Knicks and you're thinking about how you're going to beat the Celtics, you got to keep OG Anunoby. And if you could acquire a player like Paul George, I'm not saying Paul George, but if you got a player like Paul George,
I would say if you could acquire Paul George, it'd be pretty
Okay,
the
so if you had
white
Paul George and OG Anunoby, Jalen Brunson, Donnie DiVincenzo, Dante DiVincenzo.
I was going to say Donnie. New name there.
He looks like he could be a Donnie.
Does he?
Looks like Donnie Wahlberg. What do you want me to say? A younger Donnie Wahlberg. Like I'm not mentioning several guys who could be in that trade. Okay. But Jalen Brunson, like, you want to start with a way to deal with Jaylen Brown and Jason Tatum. How about I offer up OG Anunoby and Paul George? That's not
Paul
bad.
Paul George is an all-star who would fit with any team. Everybody in the league wants 6'9", highly versatile two-way wings.
And I would, he is 34, and you're a little squeamish about a guy who's had a history of injury problems, signing him to a $200 million contract, but because that's what he would want. He would want it to be an assurance that he's getting an extension at some point.
But if you're a team that's trying to win today, he's the best free agent on the market by a significant amount.
Right. I just want to point out that
Mr. MacMahon said he plays the number one premium position in the league, two-way elite wing player.
Just because you don't have quote unquote cap space doesn't mean you might not be able to get your hands on Paul George. And by the way, there could be other teams that he says, I want to be traded to, but New York is an interesting one. All right.
Who's he represented by? What agency?
I seem to recall it's 3 letters. And
Any ties
there might be a couple ties to New York.
Okay, just checking.
All right. Now let me just go backwards to James Harden. James Harden is also an unrestricted free agent. He also, I think, would have interest in staying with the Clippers.
Okay.
But if Paul George leaves, let's say he goes and signs let's say he doesn't like the contract. He's like, I'm going to go sign with the Magic or the 76ers or the Pistons, whatever. What do the Clippers do about James Harden? And
that's interesting.
Let me just say this.
Okay.
If the Clippers said goodbye to Paul George without a trade, just goodbye in free agency, thank you for your time, and then said goodbye to James Harden, thank you for your time, they'd be a cap space team to the tune of about $40 million. And they could probably create, if they said goodbye to their other free agents, if they said goodbye to Russ Westbrook, for example, and they could probably create a little bit more money if they wanted to. Now, the top free agent is Paul George. The guy you'd want cap space to sign is Paul George. I'm not sure that I'm not saying this is what the Clippers would prefer, but we're talking about a team that paid $140 million in tax and did not get out of the first round. That avenue exists for the Clippers. If they say goodbye to those 2 players, and that's not an easy decision. These are high-level players. Those are not guys you're going to replace.
And they're high-level players who they have massive investments in that have yet to be paid off in terms of the draft capital.
That's fine.
That they gave up to get them. It's tough, man. That's tough. Paul George, there very clearly will be a market. I do wonder if he really wants to leave a franchise that kind of floats under the radar and jump into a pressure cooker like you would in Philadelphia, like you would certainly in New York.
I actually don't think New York would be a pressure cooker at all.
Really?
No, I don't think at all. I think
Why?
Philly would be a massive pressure because everybody in New York is so happy with where the Knicks are at that if Paul George, number 1 free agent on the market, shows up on the Knicks, and they keep OG Anunoby and they keep this team together. Now, maybe after next year, it would be a different story, but next year would be a season-long party.
You don't think it would be
so happy?
You don't think there would be a, hey, we're a championship team, and if he falls short, then
this is a team that has won playoff series in back-to-back years for the first time in 25 years.
Well, that certainly creates a reasonable expectation. I mean, come on, dude. It's been a pressure cooker for all that entire time.
Well, they wouldn't be the favorites for the title. I'll give Bontemps that because that's.
I'm just saying. In New York right now, there's such a love affair with the Knicks and the Knicks finally being good again that at least for this upcoming season, I think it would just be, oh man, the Knicks are here. The Knicks are great. The Knicks are super fun. Now, if they get to the second round and lose again, okay, then it becomes a different story. Whereas if he walks into Philadelphia with Tyrese Maxey and Joel Embiid, after all the times they have lost, it's like you got to win right now or else. It's not like you guys have some time to ramp it up. Like, that's all I'm saying. I
Yeah,
think
and-
it's a much different level of expectation.
But I guess the broader point here is Paul George will certainly have options, and with that, with his player option, could have many options, or at least a few to a handful. I don't know how many options James Harden's going to have. It's this go round when he asked for a trade, it's not like Daryl Morey had several suitors. Well,
maybe James Harden could go back to one of his former teams.
He said this to me on the phone yesterday, and
which one?
Which one do you think?
He said on the phone yesterday, I was silent for some
Hold on,
period.
I'm going to say this. I'm going to say this right now for the aggregators. This is not reporting. This is not reporting in any way, shape, or form. Do you think Daryl Morey would say no to signing James Harden if he could resign him?
Wow. I don't think.
Do you think Daryl would say no?
Daryl, I would say, is a robot.
What about Tyrese Maxey? Would he say no?
Yeah.
What about
Daryl's a robot who does not have human emotions. So I don't think
Tim
Daryl
MacMahon would Daryl do it or not?
I just answered that. I would tell you this. I'm
not saying he's going back.
Imagine James Harden after what he said last year and how firm he was, basically tucking his tail and say, "Daryl, please take me back." I could not.
I don't think James Harden's going to Philly. I don't think the Sixers are signing James Harden.
I thought you were getting at the Rockets, and if there was going to be a Rockets reunion, it would happen.
I don't think that's happening either.
Yeah.
But if
I don't think James Harden is an Ime Udoka type of player.
If James Harden is
that clearly was determined last summer.
Here's the point: if James Harden is not on the Clippers, there's not a lot of obvious landing spots for James Harden.
Yeah, it's a lot like Russell Westbrook last summer.
I'm going to compare it to a different player last summer. What was the contract that Kyrie Irving signed in Dallas?
Well, he signed a 3-year deal for $120 guaranteed, and then $6 million more in incentives. So $2 million a year. This year, he got $1 million of that. And look, that was not like, I think what you're getting at here. There wasn't a big market for Kyrie Irving. There wasn't competition for
but there was one significant difference, which was,
you tell me.
The Mavericks were heavily incentivized to keep Kyrie Irving and desperately wanted to have him on their team and have him be happy on their team.
And look, if they didn't keep Kyrie, they could have created significant cap space, not max cap space. And the Mavericks,
same boat as Clippers. If assuming Paul George leaves, in that eventuality.
And look, the Mavericks, there was some criticism for them, like, hey, who were you bidding against? Like, nobody else could have offered more than mid-level. There was the whole thing of like, oh, Kyrie's going to meet with Phoenix, and it's like, really, about what?
Yeah, I mean, look, I thought they gave Kyrie too much money at the time.
But
I understood why they did it, but
what they did was they said, Kyrie, we value you, we respect you. We're not going to lowball you. Our contract will reflect our respect for you and how much we value you. And they came to a number where they said, this is the most we can give you and have flexibility to upgrade the roster. And that's the number that they gave him. And it was a great deal for Kyrie. His agent and stepmom, Ivy Irving, negotiated given the circumstances, got great value out of the Mavericks. But a year later and a finals appearance later, the Mavericks certainly have no regrets about giving Kyrie that money. It was a leap of faith, though, because look, when they gave him that money, they were coming off of a lottery finish.
Yeah, for sure. And
if I was James Harden, I'd be looking at that contract. That's all I'm saying.
Yeah. Well, I mean, look, to me, the Kyrie contract is a reminder, as MacMahon very well laid out there, of the fact that this isn't always just like look at a spreadsheet and merit out the value of a player, because there is a lot of human emotion in all of these things. And like this Clipper thing in general, right? You could say Kawhi Leonard's the best player on the team. He signed for 3 for $150. Nobody else should be paid more than 3 for $150. But that's not necessarily how all these things work if you want to keep this team together. And I think it does go back to the central question of the Clippers have these 3 guys. The expectation, when Kawhi signed the contract, he's like, these guys are going to extend. Sounds a lot like another trio that James Harden was part of, where everybody was going to extend. And One guy
KD,
extended, the
hey,
other two
fellas,
did not.
follow me.
Yeah, didn't quite work that way. So we'll see if history repeats itself. But again, if the Clippers believed in this team as having a chance to be a championship contending team, they will pay these guys and keep them together. And if they don't, then they're not going to.
Well, it may not be up to, well, at the end of the day, it may not be up to him. They may be like, look, this is our offer, Paul, take it or leave it. And if he leaves it, that changes.
Well, but again, that's the Clippers have the ability to pay more money
they do. That's
than anybody else. This is not a situation where Paul George, they can get more elsewhere. It's not like Isaiah Hartenstein with the Knicks where they can't pay him more than a certain amount. If somebody wants to pay him $10 million a year more than that, they can't do anything about it. The Clippers have the ability to pay him if they want to. It's just whether they choose to do it or not.
The only thing I would push back on you is you say if they believe they have a chance at a championship. And I would say it's more the risk reward. Like I know they believe they have a chance. Then the question is how much of a chance versus what's the downside if you give in and say, okay, PG, you've got leverage. Here's 4 years full max. So it's a risk reward conversation, not is there a chance?
Yeah, I mean, that's fair. When I'm saying it from a chance standpoint, it's a very fair point. I mean it from the standpoint that they don't believe it's a real chance. It's a slim enough chance that it's not worth going into the second apron for, we're saying the same thing in different ways. It's that they don't believe in the overall. If you don't keep these guys, it's because you don't truly believe you're good enough to justify the cost.
Yeah, you don't think it's a good bet.
That's right. That's what we're saying, just in different ways.
Yeah. As we talk about the Clippers paying $140 million in tax, I just want to point out Steve Ballmer this year will earn $999 million in Microsoft dividends alone.
Yeah, and that's why it's important to point out that the second apron it's not about the financial penalty. It's about the handcuffs that are put on a franchise trying to build a roster.
And also, every time Microsoft stock goes up or down 10 cents, his holding on Microsoft changes by $30 million. So it is not unusual. And I mean, I would argue it's almost regular that his net worth fluctuates by several billion dollars a day.
That's insane.
Well,
so make sure so you understand that.
The second apron was created to prevent Steve Ballmer from just spending as much money as he wants. It might as well instead of the second apron, it might as well be called the Ballmer apron, because that's what this is about. It's about not letting Steve Ballmer just add more salary, because if it wasn't for the second apron, probably would just sign Paul George and would sign all these guys and do all this stuff, because they could just keep adding and they just could worry about the money later because the luxury tax wouldn't matter. But it's not about the luxury tax. It's about all the stuff that you lose if you go over that number.
We're going to have something catchier than the Ballmer apron, like maybe the Ballmer beam, something
well,
like
we can come up with a name for it, but it's whatever we call it. Steve Ballmer's the reason it exists.
All right. Anyway, so another big free agent going on here, Klay Thompson. The thing about Klay Thompson, the Warriors, as you mentioned before, MacMahon paid $180 million in taxes this year for a team that did not make the playoffs, didn't even make the play-in. And that's just not going to carry forward. And
play-in, but yes.
I'm sorry, they made the play-in.
Yeah,
didn't make it out of the play-in.
It didn't last very long. A one-and-done play-in appearance.
Correct. Sorry. They have.
I know they floated under the radar. You might not have. ESPN might not have covered
some coverage in of them.
ESPN might not have covered that.
Klay averaged 18 points and shot 39% on three. Those numbers are good enough to get. What do you think? How much a year? If that was just a vacuum player X.
I mean, 18, 20, somewhere in that range.
Yeah, I would say about 20.
Could even be up to 25, I think, in the right scenario.
I mean, he's still more than mid-level.
And he's still one of the best three-point shooters in the league, and he's not the same defensive player he was in his prime, but he's still a solid defensive player on bigger wings, and he's a bomber from three. Like, that's still a very valuable, good player. He's just not Hall of Fame prime Klay Thompson anymore.
And so this year he earned 44 million?
Something like that. We have
40.6, I think it was.
What do you expect us to do? Prep?
$43.2 million.
Oh, I was right. I should have stuck with my first number. 40.
Yeah.
40. Okay. So he's obviously no longer a $40 million player. So, and he's obviously not thrilled with the offers that Golden State has offered him. We don't know exactly what they are. He unfollowed them.
We've heard that it's a 2-year offer. I think that's,
Right.
again, it's about as much about years as dollars in some of these
Right.
cases.
And it's fair to point out that when Andrew Wiggins and Draymond Green recently took pay cuts, and neither of them, in fact, I think if you put Green and Wiggins pay cuts together, I don't think they would average the pay cut that they are probably going to want Klay to take down into the 20s. But when Wiggins and Draymond took pay cuts, they got 4-year deals.
Yes.
And if you're Klay, those are interesting factors. And I think you even said this, Bontemps, and if it was not you, I apologize. This isn't so much about money as much as it's about respect. And also to point out that Klay had...
Which are synonyms in the NBA, by the way.
Right. But also this last year, there were games where Klay got benched down the stretch in favor of Brandon Pajemski, in favor of Moses Moody, in favor of Jonathan Kuminga.
Well, and he was pulled from the starting lineup and transitioned to a 6-man role midway through the year. So, if you're Klay Thompson, you're sitting there thinking, hey, man, like, dude.
Yeah, so Paul George is talking about fit. Like, what's Klay's fit there with where their roster is?
Well, and again, you get to the Wiggins contract, 4 years for more than 100. Draymond, 4 years for 100. And if you talk about, the same way that the Clippers tried to set a precedent with Kawhi Leonard, that can work the other way. Clay's like, hey, the sacrifice, quote unquote, sacrifice precedent has been set by this franchise at 4 years for 100 some odd mil. So, okay, you want me to sacrifice? Where's that offer?
So,
go ahead.
The other complicating factor on the Warriors is you've got this Chris Paul $30 million team option, which the pickup date is June 29th. Obviously, I'm sure when they traded for him, they thought that they would probably cut him and say goodbye. I don't remember what his guarantee is. It's a few million guarantee.
I'm not sure there's...
Yeah, I think this one's non. Last year was about half was guaranteed.
Oh, totally non-guaranteed.
Yeah,
I'm checking right now.
And if you've got Klay Thompson,
yeah, it's totally non-guaranteed through June 28th.
Okay, they could agree to a contract extension with or a new contract with Klay between now and June 28th. It's over a week. But if they're going to lose Klay for nothing, if Klay's walking out the door, they may want to hang on to Chris Paul either to play him or to trade him. And so what do you do, Bontemps, if you get to the end of the month and you got to make a decision on Chris Paul?
You'd probably get Chris to bump back the guarantee date because it's not, I don't think it's really costing Chris Paul that much for the possibility to get $30 million to...
Yeah, well, Chris Paul may ask for a few $1 million guarantee to do that.
He may, but I don't think he has a huge leg to stand on there, really, because if it's probably better for him. If the Warriors are asked to move that date back, especially if it's to like July 5th or something like that.
It keeps alive his chances of getting the $30 million, I guess.
Exactly. Yeah. And it's like you could say, well, give me $5 million. And they could say, well, we could just get rid of you and save all this money.
I guess
and you could not have $30 million. Say, well, maybe I'll wait and see if I get $30 million.
And look, Chris is not going to make any kind of decision on that without having a pretty solid, and like knowing Chris Paul, a very solid understanding.
He'll pretend like this is how a conversation with Chris. Do you know about your contract option? What? I have a contract option? Yeah, it's June 28th. What year?
Listen, it could work out for Chris Paul. Like, this is totally made up, not reporting scenario. If, let's say, Klay leaves, the Warriors decide, hey, you know what? We'll guarantee Chris's salary, and we have these draft picks, we have stuff. Maybe we could use a giant expiring salary to go add an impact player who can help us right now. Chris Paul gets his money, just like what happened basically with the Wizards trade, right? He goes to Washington. Maybe he gets bought out. maybe he gets traded, but he still gets his money and then can figure out what he's going to do.
Yeah.
So,
or there's like, Chris might have an understanding of, okay, hey, there's a decent chance that I will, if I opt into this, I'll end up getting traded to a team that would take me on that salary for 1 year. Maybe a team that really needs a run the show veteran mentor type of point guard
who has to hit the salary floor.
Yeah, maybe. I don't know. Can anybody think of any teams that might fit that description?
I hear that Texas has good
there'd
state
be no
income
state,
tax.
Yeah, no state income tax. I mean, so
there's a lot of benefits. The short answer is there's a lot of benefits in potentially moving that date back.
So
again, Chris would make that decision with a lot of information.
Okay, Bontemps, you have a good feel for the Warriors. Used to live in San Francisco. What do you think is going to happen here? Do you think that at the 11th hour we see a Klay deal and everybody's kumbaya?
I find it hard to believe at the end of the day that Klay Thompson is going to play somewhere else.
So do I
think everybody there values the fact that he has spent his career there. He is a beloved figure within the team there. Obviously, this last year, there were at times difficult situations with him, but he embraced coming off the bench. He played well for them. I mean, the thing to remember about Klay is he's like a lot of these shooters, like Danny Green, sort of, right? Or like Danny Green would have these stretches where he would look like he'd never played basketball before and miss 1,000 threes seemingly in a row. And then he would have a month where he would feel like he shot 90% from three. And that's sort of where Klay Thompson is now as a player, where he's a little streakier than you would like, but he's still a very good player. And I think once everybody gets a chance to sort of look at it and think about it, I think they'll end up coming to an agreement that everybody will be happy with. And look, maybe some team will come in and throw a boatload of money at Klay over 4 years. They'll say, you know what? I've had a great run here. I'm going to go play somewhere else. I think for a variety of reasons, that does not feel like a very likely scenario to me.
Well, the other thing that's possible is if the Warriors are just holding tight at 2 years, somebody throws a boatload of money at them over 2 years. That's much more than what the Warriors are offering. Or
I just don't think that's going to happen.
I will say this:
it's not like the Warriors. I don't think the Warriors are going to offer them 2 for 16, right?
No.
So is somebody really coming in and offering 2 for 60? I don't think so. Maybe, but I don't think so.
I don't. Okay,
not out of the realm of possibility.
Let me just say as a separate thing, I do think with this apron era, we are going to be in a time where especially guys in their 30s end up getting big short contracts.
I got some news. Got some breaking news from Adrian Wojnarowski. JJ Redick has agreed on a 4-year contract to become the next coach of the Los Angeles Lakers. Rob Pelinka offered the job this morning. Redick started working on the staff to surround himself with experience.
Well, he just started putting together a staff. It just began. All right. Well,
live breaking news.
Live reaction.
One last thought on Klay. It would be an absolute shame to have him in another uniform and have his last moments in a Warriors uniform being an 0 for 10 performance in the play-in game that Wendy forgot about.
And I do ultimately think with Steph Curry, with Draymond Green, with Steve Kerr, with Joe Lacob, with Mike Dunleavy's been there for a while now. There's enough institutional knowledge there and institutional connected tissue there between all these guys that I think this gets done. And I think it gets done in a good place. And I suspect it is probably a 2-year deal to line everybody up on the same deal. And that's how it is. And I think that's where it ends up. Maybe it won't, but if I had to guess, that's what I would guess it would do.
Hey, MacMahon, now we know why Bontemps is in Bristol. He's interviewing to replace JJ on the
Hey, nobody will hire Bontemps to be a head coach, so we can eliminate that risk.
Can you imagine Breen?
God.
Can you imagine Breen puts it in? Hey, listen, Pally, that was a ridiculous pin down. That was
or Bontemps Breen's in mid bang and Bontemps interrupts. Bang! He's going to be a double bang. Bontemps interrupts after the first.
Oh man,
cuts him up after the first bang.
That's great.
All right. Well,
I would never cut off Mike Breen ever.
I guess we're compelled to discuss JJ Redick officially being hired.
For what Bontemps is called the worst job in the NBA.
It is the worst job in the NBA. I wish JJ. I love JJ. I've gotten to know him over the last couple of years working with him here. I think he's a brilliant dude. As smart a person basketball-wise as I've been around. I will be genuinely rooting for him to have success. I stand by what I've said about the job. I don't see how you succeed in the job. I think it's an incredibly difficult situation, but I hope it works out for him.
Yeah, the
do.
talent to expectations ratio and expectations, spotlight, scrutiny, everything that comes along with that. The talent to expectation ratio is out of whack. But having said that, you at least have a chance to compete. I mean, you've got 2 all-NBA players on the roster. Man, it's a tough job for a first-time head coach, though.
It's a tough job for any coach.
What do you think about the 4 years part of it?
I mean, surprised.
What
I thought he'd get more.
Yeah. Monty Williams got what, 5? Lasted 1. I mean,
well, it's 6.
It's just, the thing is, JJ, I know that people, Dan Hurley turned down $70 million, and we were all like going to the calculators about like what it costs to live in Connecticut versus what it costs to live in LA. And JJ has a very powerful media career.
Yes.
Not only that he's got this or had this great job at our company, ESPN, ABC, his podcast, which I don't know if it'll continue. I'm talking about The Old Man, the 3. I mean, I would kind of be hard. That is
no, he had a production company. I mean, that was really doing great work and generating a ton of revenue.
And I was talking to somebody in the business just this week who told me that Mind the Game, had it continued into next year with LeBron and JJ, would potentially be an absolute cash cow.
Well, imagine now that it's head coach and star. I mean, it's probably going to be even
amazing
more
if they kept it going. But the point that they're making is that JJ Redick may earn more money than Dan Hurley does. In fact, I don't even think maybe. They were saying JJ Redick earns more money than Dan Hurley does. So what you're asking JJ to leave from a financial situation isn't any different than when you were asking Dan Hurley to leave.
Well, and look, the one thing you can't question is JJ's desire to coach.
And I'll tell you this, I can tell you this unequivocally. He wanted this job.
Yeah.
Well, listen, all you got to do, I encourage everybody listening or watching to go find the clip of JJ on the Road Trippin' Pod. I don't remember which way it was, but it was him with Richard Jefferson, Channing Frye, and Allie Clifton. I don't remember if it was on his or theirs or whatever. They did one of these crossover pods. And Allie Clifton asked him what about coaching. And like, why would you want to coach? Essentially, I think the question was just, why do you want to coach? And she sort of was alluding to the various jobs that were open.
Mm-hmm.
And he said, essentially, I don't want to talk about specific jobs. What I will tell you is that I miss things like being in the road locker room after a win and the high that you get from being in that situation. And it's not something that you can replicate in any other situation in these other things we're doing. And he clearly, for a while now, has thought a lot about being in that kind of situation. And I can understand why, as a competitor, if you could sign up to have LeBron James and Anthony Davis, why it would be alluring to want to coach them and think you'd have a shot to win with them. Now, for all the other reasons we've discussed, I don't think it's going to work out in a successful manner, but I really hope for JJ's sake, as somebody who really likes them a lot, that I'm wrong and they're awesome next year. It'd be great.
Yeah. So I would just say, as Jackson points out, his production company, 342 Productions, has other podcasts that only a couple of them involve him. I mean, that could still go on. Their commentary on JJ would be interesting.
I was going to say that would be interesting. No conflict of interest there.
Here's what I'll say. JJ is, typically former players are stereotyped as a certain way that they coach. JJ, I believe, intends to be a tactics head coach, as his podcast with LeBron indicated. He is going to have schemes. He is going to be cooking stuff up for ATOs and stuff like that on the sidelines. He, I think, will bring a level of analytics and design and strategy to the Lakers that they didn't have under Darvin Ham.
Well, and he leaned heavily into the analytics stuff as a player. I think anybody who's listened to him, call games or his podcast, like he dives as deeply into that stuff as any ex-player in the media for sure.
Yeah. Oh, JJ's intellect is off the charts. If you just spend any time around him talking to him, he's a super smart dude. And he's also, as one of these shooters, right? Like all of them, he's obsessive and detail oriented and like all the stuff that you would think for a guy that's going to walk in and have a plan for how he wants to do it. He spent a long time thinking about doing this. I'm sure he's going to have everything mapped out for how he's going to want to do it.
He's had a very long time he's had a very long time to think about this.
Now, look, it's also, though, let's not skip past the fact that, aside from coaching his kids, this is a first-time coach, not a first-time head coach, a first-time coach, period, jumping into arguably the highest pressure job in the NBA. Like Steve Nash, similar type of situation when he went to Brooklyn. That was tough. He'd been a consultant, but he hadn't been a coach. Now you can argue Steve Kerr, similar situation in Golden State. It worked out great. He'd been a GM. He hadn't been a coach. Jason Kidd, though, going straight from his playing career to being the Nets head coach, he'll tell you, and then Milwaukee right after that, he'll tell you that he benefited from being an assistant under Frank Vogel in LA and kind of being able to take a step back and learn. And that
hopefully JJ's tenure is a little more.
How did you get along with JJ when he played for the Mavericks?
He was here for like a week and a half, and it was the COVID year.
It was the COVID year. That's right.
And honestly, like JJ was that was that the last year of his career? I believe it was.
Yeah, it was.
Yeah, and he was hurt when he got here.
I covered him in Philly. I ended up
hurting himself and not playing in the playoffs.
Yeah, I always enjoyed talking to him when he was a player in the league with the Clippers, with the Sixers. He's always a super bright, interesting guy, had interesting thoughts on stuff. Like you always knew, I didn't know he was going to turn into a podcast empire, but you always knew if he wanted to do media stuff or anything else, like he could do whatever he wanted. Like he was always a super bright, interesting guy. And it's a reason why all of his pods have been really interesting and done really well. Like he's got a unique take on stuff and he's very interesting. And he's a very bright guy. So I wish him well, but it's going to be a really, really, really difficult challenge on a lot.
Let's talk about what the Lakers have to do with their roster here in the short term. So LeBron is going to opt out, I would assume, by June 29th. I think just as signs have pointed to JJ being the coach here for a while, I think the signs point to LeBron remaining with the Lakers. The terms will be interesting. He can sign up to 3 years. I think it's more likely that the bigger thing will be what happens with D'Angelo Russell. Russell has a $17 million option, or maybe it's 18 player option. If he opts into his contract, he becomes an absolute prime target to be traded. With a draft pick or even without. And, because of that, there's some belief that I've speculated that he could opt out of that contract. Not that he would have offers pouring in for more money than that, but because he would kind of compel the Lakers to try to re-sign him. Because if he walks, it's not like they get $18 million in salary cap space. Especially if LeBron comes back at the full max, which is over $50 million. They're a taxpayer mid-level team. They'd be looking to replace him either with guys on their roster. They'd be asking Gabe Vincent to have a much better year, or they'd be out, trying to replace him for $6 or $7 million, whatever the taxpayer mid-level is. So that's a big thing there. And then they have, I think 3 first-round picks that they're able to trade. And they have a couple of players who they may be willing to part with. Rui Hachimura up there. Austin Reeves is a desired player, but I'm not sure what the return is there. And Austin Reeves plays a pretty sizable role for them. I've always been more interested in what Rob Pelinka is doing with the roster than what he's going to do at head coach.
Yeah.
JJ Redick's a fascinating name, but it's not going to matter unless they get help on the roster, especially at the defensive wings.
Yes, that's the underlying problem. They don't have enough at perimeter athleticism on the roster. They're not good enough to compete with the elite teams in the West. And as we've talked about a ton, the West is only going to be better. Memphis is going to be better. Houston's going to be better. San Antonio is going to be better. Like these teams, Golden State, if Draymond Green. Anywhere. No, like Golden State probably will have a better record if Draymond Green can avoid getting suspended. Like you go through it, like it's going to be a bear to get to advance in the Western Conference. Like it's going to be really, really hard. And they got a lot of work to do on the roster to feel like they can stack up with these other teams.
Yeah. So, all right. I'm sure we're going to have a lot of coverage on our network about JJ Redick. I want to talk about another coaching situation. Obviously, the Pistons parted ways with Monty Williams.
Similar spotlight.
With 5 years and $65 million left on his contract. It's not surprising that they made this move. The timing is surprising. There was some thought that this could happen at the end of the season. The season comes and goes. They don't make a coaching change. They wait a month.
When did Trajan Langdon get hired?
Well, he was announced
in the last couple of weeks.
He was announced as the president like 2 weeks after he actually got the job. He was already functioning in the job. So
that's the thing. It's like it wasn't even like, man, it took a while even after that.
I know.
Yeah, he was named to the job on May 31st.
So it's been 3 weeks since he got named, and so I think it's been at least 4 or 5 weeks. And so you wonder what that process was, but forget about that. It was a failed connection. Monty didn't even really want the job in the first place.
No, they money whipped him to get him to take it after he kept telling me he didn't want it.
Right. So
it was an absolute disaster.
What should the Pistons do now, Bontemps?
They should go hire Sean Sweeney. That's what they should do.
Let's tell everybody who Sean Sweeney is in case they don't know.
Well, Ben MacMahon knows all about Sean Sweeney because he was the lead assistant under Jason Kidd this year with the Dallas Mavericks. He was the lead assistant with Jason Kidd in Milwaukee also. He was in Detroit briefly as well.
Yeah, for a few years before Dallas when Jay Kidd was between head coaching jobs.
Yes. And he began his career where I met him originally in the bowels of the very old, decrepit building on Murray Hill Parkway in East Rutherford, New Jersey, where Bobby Marks spent countless hours in his former life, where Sean was the video coordinator for Avery Johnson early on in his career as he had moved up. And all anybody has to do is look at what the Dallas Mavericks have done the last 3 years and getting to the NBA Finals this year, getting to the conference finals a couple of years ago. They're not exactly brimming with overall defensive talent. And Sean Sweeney is the reason why they have had really good defensive teams. And he's
proven that if you give him reasonable pieces to work with, that he can build a very good defense.
Yes. And he's a maniacal worker. And he's also a guy who, if you look at Detroit and you look at teams around the NBA, the biggest problem that teams have in general when they're failing unsuccessful teams is that they don't have alignment from the ownership level to the front office, to the coach, to the top player on the team, right? And what Detroit needs more than anything is for whoever Trajan Langdon hires is for somebody who's going to come in and set a culture there that can have these young players they have grow in it and get these guys to improve. Obviously, hiring Fred Vinson hopefully will allow some of these guys.
Yes,
Thompson,
real quick, just muddling the waters even more here is that within the last week or two, the Trajan made his first hire, and that was to pull development coaching star Fred Vinson from New Orleans to Detroit. Trajan had been the general manager in Detroit. Fred Vinson is highly regarded as a shooting coach. And so he hired him to be on Monty Williams' staff and then fired Monty Williams. So that's interesting.
Well, and just in general, that somebody needs to come in and set a culture for working and building a defensive identity and giving these young players some structure to go forward and try to build a real sustainable longer-term thing in Detroit. Because, by the way, they've got a ton of cap space. I'm a huge fan of Cade Cunningham, who's a big 6'6" guard who was the star of the select team last summer. They've got Asar Thompson, who's interesting. They've got Jalen Duren. They've got Jaden Ivey. Like, they have another top 5 pick this year.
It's a rebuild, but you're not starting from scratch. There's stuff to work with. And I think, people around the league who know Sean have jokingly called him a mini Tom Thibodeau for a long time because he's a short guy who always looks kind of grumpy if you just don't know him. He's got a crew cut like Tibbs used to have before.
No, it's a red flat top. He looks like a Celtics fan.
He doesn't. He might not pass the MacMahon ref height requirement.
Oh, no way, no chance. I'll say this though, Sweeney stars respect him. You know how much Luka Doncic respects him? Basically, Luka said, "Hey, Sweeney, what are you up to this summer?" And the next thing you know, Sasha Doncic, who's now running Slovenia's basketball program, says, "Hey, Sweeney, you want to come? Can we get you over to Europe this summer to help out with the Slovenian national team?" He's not going to be the head coach because the head coach is already in place, but I assure you this, Sweeney will be handling X's and O's unless something else comes up here. Had a great relationship with
if
Giannis
Lucas
in
says,
Milwaukee.
"Can you work with me in the summer?" The Mavericks will arrange a private jet to get you there.
It's an extension of the job in Dallas. Yeah. But Luka loves and respects the guy. And it's like, it's one thing, like when sometimes, these stars will love a coach because it's, chuckle, it's kind of a buddy thing. One thing that Sweeney did when he first got here is he used to shout from the sidelines, 450. I was telling Luka, you're the 450th best defensive player in the league. In other words, dead freaking last. So like he's challenging these guys. He worked with Giannis as Giannis was developing and really challenged him. I mean, obviously the Detroit job is a developmental job first and foremost. And I think if you want to see Sweeney's work in development, he was the guy who was working day in, day out starting last summer with this raw lottery pick named Derek Lively II, who ended up being a massive factor in the Mavericks run to the finals. So listen, I'm a Sweeney fan. It would be a big blow to the Mavericks. And it's interesting. The first year he was here, he was getting interviews. He was kind of a name in the coaching cycle. Obviously he didn't get a job. Last year, you're not going to get interviews when the team falls apart like it did, and it's such a disappointing season here in Dallas. And then this year, he didn't get any interviews, and it was kind of like, that's interesting. And now this Detroit thing comes up. He does have relationships, at the ownership level there. Obviously, haven't been there for a few years, so I think
James Edwards from the Athletic. Yeah, James Edwards from the Athletic mentioned him as a possible candidate yesterday. Covers the Pistons for them, and. Look, I mean, whoever Trajan Langdon hires, the Pistons finally have to have alignment from top to bottom because that's been their problem. And it's the problem for any team that struggles. You've got people all over the place not going in the same direction. It's hard enough in the NBA to win if you don't have everybody going in the same direction. Or if you do, if you don't, you have no chance. And all the craziness that's gone on in Detroit the past few years, whether it's Sean or somebody else, they've got to hire somebody who's going to be on the same page as this guy and can work together with him for a while and start to build a foundation for something. And obviously I've known Sean for a long time. And I think if he got that job, it would work out pretty well for Detroit. So I'll be curious to see what
there's other,
do,
obviously I wouldn't even say he's the lead candidate.
No, I mean, there's lots of people like Mike
he's just
and
a candidate that you guys have known and know he's a strong option.
There's lots of good assistants.
I don't know what his title is, but if there's ever such thing as an associate head coach, he's an associate head coach.
Yes, he is.
And by the way, that's how Tibbs was with the Celtics in 2008. Like Tibbs was practically on, attached to Doc Rivers at the hip, calling out the defenses back in those days.
Yeah, he's Jay Kidd's right hand.
Yeah. James Borrego is another guy who's been mentioned in Detroit because he is in New Orleans now, and that's where Trajan came from as an associate head coach in New Orleans under Willie Green. Obviously interviewed in LA and Cleveland. By the time this pod posts, he may have gotten an offer from the Cavs. Who knows? We'll see. But Borrego is another name there in Detroit because of the Langdon connection. All right. I think that's enough for now. We have got a lot more free agency to talk about, which we will, getting back to our normal pod schedule. And who knows what emergency pods may be called for. I'm afraid to say it. But we'll be here to break it all down for you. And we're now getting back to a routine schedule, which we're all happy for. Thank you to Bontemps. Thank you, MacMahon. Thank you to Jackson, our producer. Thank you for listening, and we will talk to you soon.
Adios, amigos.